What have you got for us today, Ligeia?
I actually have a piece of liver, some fava beans, and a nice Chianti. Would you like to
Oh,
join me?
how very Hannibal Lecter of you. I love it.
You immediately recognized it. Great.
Of course, of
So,
course. I love Silence of the Lambs. What a great film.
yes, and the topic today is cannibalism.
Okay, that's a fair transition. Take us away.
Someone actually recreated the dish.
With a human liver, though.
No, no. We will have pictures that show humans that were butchered, that were partially eaten, so you will have to censor some of that.
Yeah, or I may not show all. It depends. I'll have to see because that's some iffy territory. I know we could talk about it. I don't know if I can show it, but I'll play around with that. That's homework for me.
Okay, so cannibalism is a topic that is very prominent in anthropology. And maybe you have heard that some people assume there isn't actually cannibalism, so that it's a myth, it doesn't really exist.
But there are people who think cannibalism does not exist at all.
Yes,
But
yes.
cannibalism has it's not just like one form of a thing. Like there's multiple versions of cannibalism, isn't there?
Yes, and we're going to talk about them. But there are people who say this is all just colonialism and they made it up. So European explorers made it up um, because they wanted to enslave people, and nobody ever ate anyone in history.
Well, that sounds like bullshit to me. I definitely believe that there was a level of cannibalism that has definitely happened in history. I'm not saying it's like I mean maybe royalty, but I mean there's little cases, little weird cases here and there of people who had no choice but to eat other people to survive type situations, right?
Exactly. And we will go into one case of an American anthropologist who actually wrote a cooking manual for cannibals.
Color me intrigued. Take us away for our Halloween special.
Let's go. So, talking about cannibalism, as an anthropologist, you keep running into this, and there are legends about anthropologists who have actually eaten human meat, but it's not quite as common among anthropologists. It was more common among British sailors, for example. Um, but yeah, we sometimes have to eat mystery meat, and I didn't do quite that much field research. So I ate mystery meat once, but it wasn't human. I'll show you what it was.
Was it raccoon?
No, but close. This is a
Fox?
kuon.
I'm sorry, a what?
A kuon. I'll write it down for you. So I ate this in Vietnam. I didn't know what it was, and Vietnamese people love to prank others, and they love to shock you. So they gave me some little meatballs, and they said, "This is something very special. We caught it in the hills. You need to try this." So I did, and then they said it's fox, but it's not fox. It's kuon, and kuon is a specific type of canine in Southeast Asia. So as you can see, it looks a little bit like a fox, but it's slightly bigger, and it's usually seen as a type of wild dog.
I could see why people would mistake it for a fox, though. But is it kind of like a link between the two, maybe?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there is also the language barrier, so they don't know whether I know their word for it, and I may not know their. Sorry, they may not know a European word for it. So this is why they said it's a fox, because they knew that I would recognize that.
No, fair enough.
yes, we do eat mystery meat. And yes, we'll come to the person who wrote that cooking manual for cannibals. And what he did was he basically included recipes that he had picked up while he was doing field research. And some of them are really, really horrifying. So I don't think we can go too deep into it. Cannibalism is a little more than just eating human flesh. There are versions where you drink blood or where you burn someone and you eat or drink the ashes. So sometimes human ashes are thrown into a drink and you drink it down. Sometimes they're baked into bread or cakes or something like this. You can make soup from them. And that's why it can be difficult to recognize it, because typically you would assume that people just eat other people. But that is the very basic method. And there are three large groups of cannibals. So the first group would be people who commit emergency cannibalism. And emergency cannibalism, that is something that you would have heard of. That would be the custom of the sea. That's what British sailors called it when they were shipwrecked and they were sitting in a little lifeboat and had no water and no food and needed to find something to eat. They would often eat people who had died anyway. So in many of these cases, people would start drinking salt water and they would die due to this. And their shipmates would eat them after they had died, so they didn't kill anyone. But there was also an actual custom where they pulled straws, and whoever got the short straw would turn his back on the others, and they would stab him or shoot him in the head from behind. And then they would eat him. I'm going to show you some pictures of emergency cannibalism. So this is the custom of the sea. And you can see that the head is already removed. And they had to eat this person raw because they couldn't make fire in these little lifeboats. The Uruguayans. So that is one of the most well-known cases of emergency cannibalism. That happened in 1972. An Uruguayan rugby team crashed in the Andes Mountains in South America on their way home. And some of them died, so they did the same thing that British sailors had done all this time, and they ate the dead. I don't know whether anyone was actually killed, because there were enough dead people lying around, and the cold temperatures, as you can see, kept them fresh. But they sent out some people to get help, which was difficult. They had to climb down the mountains. They had to hike through completely unknown jungle terrain. And they didn't know where they were going. So they had no idea how to get to the nearest settlement. And the people who were getting help, they also had no food and no water with them. So that took a while. And while they were gone, the others somehow had to keep themselves alive. And first they started eating the peanuts that the airplane had on board, but they soon ran out of those. And yeah, they were lucky that the snow preserved the corpses.
Eerily convenient freezer.
Yeah. Most people don't think that this is a problem because it's really an emergency in those cases. So people are starving, and especially when they're just eating people who are dead anyway, then nobody will call this a crime. We know from British sailors when they had done this, they felt bad about it, and when they came home, they didn't talk about it. So they were very afraid that their families would judge them, and they saw it as a crime in front of God, not an actual punishable crime that would get them into prison, because the government understood what they were doing, and they didn't approve of it, but people cut them some slack. But they thought that God wouldn't understand that. So they had
Fair.
severe trauma from this. They didn't want to do that, and it was not like you're at sea and you're running out of food and you start discussing who to eat next, because that was a decision they usually only made when they were really starving to death. Okay. Second one is pathological cannibalism, and we're talking about psychopaths here, about Hannibal Lecter, but also about real-life cannibals, and I have a whole list of them, like, for example, Ed Gein in the United States, Albert Fish, Jeffrey Dahmer, and there were whole parties that committed cannibalism in some cases. So in the United States, for example, you have the Donner Party of 1846. Those were settlers who ran into problems, and they were starving, so they started eating each other. They were not just the ones who committed the crime, but also victims of the crime. And there are a couple of diseases that will make you commit cannibalism. So, yeah.
You can explain. That's good, because I'm really... What?
Yes, so there are things like clinical vampirism and clinical lycanthropy. And usually when we talk about vampires or lycanthropes, and you would commonly call them werewolves, when we talk about this, they're usually monsters from folklore. But there are mental illnesses that are called clinical vampirism and clinical lycanthropy. So in clinical vampirism, you have this delusion that you want to drink blood, and of course human blood. So these people often start with animals. They kill animals or harm animals, and then they drink the blood. They have a bunch of delusions connected to this. So someone who suffers from clinical vampirism often thinks that they can hear the blood rushing through your veins when they stand next to you, and that it's kind of talking to them. So it's like a river or a brook, and you hear it. You hear the bubbling and the murmuring of the stream, and they think that they can hear words out of this. Yeah. They get really turned on, and they they want to drink your blood when they are standing next to you, because they think they can hear it, and some think they can smell it even from further away. So of course blood has a very distinct smell. It has a copper smell or a metallic smell. So of course you can smell that when there is a lot of blood in a room and you're close to it, but they think they can smell it from kilometers away.
Okay. It's very interesting. I knew about clinical lycanthropy, and I knew that there were quote-unquote people who had the morbid fascination of wanting to drink people's blood. I knew about the animal blood one. I knew that, but I know some of them want to transition to like people blood. I didn't know how in depth some of their delusions went, though. And I'm not trying to shame those people, but it is bullshit. although, if you or you know someone who has clinical vampirism, get us in contact with them, because I'd so love to have a conversation. That's so interesting.
Yes, so you bring up a very good point, I have to say, because it's not always that they kill people to get to the blood. In some cases, it's a fetish, and when they find someone who gives them blood, then they will take that. They will not kill the person.
Yeah. I can't imagine all of them, or even the majority of them, would want to kill people deliberately. It's just that the blood aspect, isn't it? Whereas I think typical mythological vampires, do end up killing their victims as a byproduct of the blood part. But even like vampires in history, or even stories and stuff, they're not known for immediately killing their victims. In some cases, they might do like a blood farm, for example, where they'll get victims, they'll kind of drain them a bit to weaken them, but they'll keep them alive, maybe locked away in a dungeon or something, so that way they can kind of... And if they keep feeding them and keep them alive long enough, they can keep feeding off of said victim. It's really, really morbid, but incredibly clever the more you think about it.
Yes, and maybe we should go into the nutritional value of blood. when we're at it. So a human being can lose up to 1 liter of blood. It's not recommended that you lose that much, but you would still be standing after that. So you're not in a state where you can't get up anymore. You would need a little bit of care after that. So typically when you donate blood, they take about half a liter out of you. And in Japan, it's even less. In Japan, they only take a quarter of a liter from you because people are smaller and thinner, so they don't take half.
Did not know that. Interesting.
And when you have a liter of blood, let's say the vampire manages to pull out a whole liter of blood. That is the equivalent of a kilogram of meat in nutritional value. So you would have to eat 2 pounds of meat. No, not 2 pounds. Wait, is it? I think it's double. Yeah, it's 2 pounds of meat and 1 kilogram. And I mean, who does that? Because that's a lot of meat.
That is a lot of meat.
You wouldn't even go to a steakhouse and order a kilogram.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there are challenges that do that, but it's not necessary. Not necessary.
Yes.
Because even whenever I cook a meal and stuff, and it's like a pound of meat, it tends to get split up among 2 to 4 people. It's true. You don't need that much for one person.
Right. So let's say the vampire drains about a liter out of you. And then that vampire wouldn't have to eat that quickly anymore. That would last a while. He would probably just take half a liter of you, or a quarter, depending on how hungry he is. And you can survive that because your blood recovers. So your blood changes once a month. And the red blood cells, they die off after about 4 weeks. And your bone marrow makes new red blood cells. Your body makes its own red blood.
Who says we're not educational? Nobody has said that.
We'll go into this later. It's getting more horrifying, but yeah. Okay. So the blood has the same nutritional value as the same amount of meat has. A vampire doesn't need to drain you completely. That would be about 6 liters of blood that a human being has. And they're not going to drink all of it. So even someone who was bitten by a vampire and drained wouldn't be completely drained. There wouldn't be empty veins. So that person would still have blood in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the vampire would probably have some heartburn.
I would imagine. I guess just, ooh. I mean, the more you think about drinking blood, we shouldn't. That's a whole separate topic where we're getting a little too far. I apologize. I was just curious.
Okay. Let's move over to clinical lycanthropy. And clinical lycanthropy doesn't necessarily make you kill and eat humans, but in some cases it does. So there have been cases where people thought they turned into werewolves. Nowadays, it is speculated that maybe this could be a side effect of Huntington's disease, which is an actual brain disease, because it also causes delusions and hallucinations. Let me show you. So there is a brain scan. And this, for comparison, is Max Schreck, a very, very famous vampire actor from the early 20th century, from a German movie about Count Dracula. But they couldn't get the rights for Dracula. The family wouldn't sell the rights. So they made their own version. And on the left, you have him in full makeup, and on the right is what he actually looked like. So many people think he just looked like that.
All right. It's not a Nosferatu, is it?
Yes, exactly. 1920s. He was a normal person, so that was just great makeup. And you can see here the person changing into a wolf. So that is the picture for clinical lycanthropy and the brain scan. Interestingly, clinical lycanthropy doesn't just describe someone who thinks he's a werewolf, but it describes all sorts of people who have the delusion that they're animals. And these people usually think that they're animals, but the version of an animal as they have gotten it to know. So it's a bit difficult to explain because they're not thinking of themselves as an actual biological wolf. They don't run around and pee on trees, for example. They don't do that. So they don't depict the actual animal's behavior. It's not about the biology, but they have a certain picture in their mind how a wolf should behave, or in other cases, how a lion should behave, for example. So normally, if you were actually a lion, you would sleep about 20 hours a day. You would not run around roaring and attacking people because that is only a tiny part of a lion's day. And, 20 hours, they're asleep. They're like a house cat that is very lazy. So these people behave like they think the animal they've chosen would behave. It can be a delusion, so in some cases they didn't even pick that. It just came to them because they're mentally ill. But in other cases, they like certain animals, they wish they could be that animal, and that is known as clinical lycanthropy. Doesn't have to be a wolf, can be a wolf, is often a wolf. There are historical cases, and one that happened in the 1990s in France. So there was a guy who started a new job, and he met a colleague at work. He invited that colleague to dinner at his place, and they had just started to eat, and then the new employee launched himself at his guest and killed him and partially ate him. And when he was arrested by French police, he said, well, I turned into a wolf. It wasn't my fault. There is this wolf that lives inside me, and when we were eating, the wolf wanted to eat. So, of course, it attacked my new co-worker. And that is bullshit.
It's 100%
a wolf,
bullshit.
A wolf would not
wolves don't just randomly attack people,
No, and I mean, they were eating, so
yeah,
it doesn't
so
have
there must
to
have
be
been meat, right? Like, come on.
Yeah. So there is a chance that he made this up, but they decided that he was actually mentally ill. So he may have thought this, and he may have been looking for an excuse to attack and kill someone, because that is often the case. So in clinical lycanthropy, a lot of people keep saying, I turned into a tiger, I turned into a wolf, I had to kill the other person, the animal inside of me wouldn't let me do anything else. So that is the insane part. And in 1507, a French court decided that there are no werewolves, there is only clinical lycanthropy. So at the beginning of the 16th century, they decided there's no monster. It's really just people who are insane. This is very remarkable because in the 1500s, a lot of other countries surrounding France would still burn people on the stake for something like this.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's move over to North America, because you also have a spirit in North America, in the northern USA, I should say, and southern Canada. And it's a spirit of the Algonquin people, and I think you've heard of that one. Would you like... Yeah? What do you think it is?
Spirit of the Algonquin people. The first thing that comes to mind is like a skinwalker, but I don't know if that's with the Algonquin or not.
No, that's southwest. We're talking about northern US and southern Canada. The other one. The Wendigo.
Oh. Oh, I didn't realize that was Algonquin, but yeah, interesting. Okay.
So this is how they usually picture him. I know that there are more modern depictions, but they are heavily influenced by internet lore. So usually Wendigo is not only the monster, but also the spirit that possesses the monster. So it starts as a spirit that has no body, and it possesses a human and causes that person to kill and eat someone.
That's right.
And every time the Wendigo eats, it grows. So it can never be satisfied. It's always hungry.
I did not know that. Did not know
Yeah,
that part.
that is bad, because the older they grow and the more people they eat, the bigger they get.
Yeah, that's
I'll
horrifying.
show you the other pictures. So nowadays, in internet law, they're often depicted as beings that have a deer head, like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can never be satisfied. They will always be hungry. And it's a cautionary tale. So this actually makes sense, because a lot of people in North America, a lot of native people in North America, were at stage 1B of cultural economy. And this means they were hunters and gatherers. And stage 1A is hunting and gathering without dogs. There are some people who did that and who are still doing that. And 1B is with dogs. So a little bit more civilized than 1A, but still the lowest stage of cultural economy. And when you're at that stage, you cannot plan ahead a lot. You simply live from your hand into the mouth. So whatever you find, you eat. And if you don't find anything, you can't eat anything. So hunters and gatherers in more northern areas often have problems to survive the winter, because they typically don't preserve food, or only preserve food in small quantities. So you hunt during the summer, and then you try to preserve the stuff you've hunted or gathered. But even during the summer, it's never enough for everyone. So they already have problems feeding themselves, and they can't store much for the winter. And that is the stage that most North American natives were at. We also have some at stage 2B, which is gardening. We'll get to that in a different video when we talk about the cultural stages in economy. And this means that Native Americans typically went hungry during the winter. There was very little food. They would try to hunt during the winter and were not always successful. So there are certain customs, for example, that older women would fake Wendigo psychosis. So they would be thrown out of the village and they would go and die in the woods. And they did that to protect their own families. So nobody got the idea to eat anyone else. And nobody would have to starve. They were essentially sacrificing themselves. So the rest of the family had a little bit more food, and none of them would have to try and eat human flesh.
Okay.
But still, people ate human flesh. And that is the background story of the Wendigo. It's an evil spirit that will constantly talk to you and try to get you to eat human flesh. And as soon as you do that, you're cursed. You cannot live with your tribe anymore. They will kick you out. They will possibly kill you if they can. And you will wander the woods, and you will crave human flesh after that. It's almost like, in Europe, possession by a demon. The symptoms are very similar. And that is known as a culture-bound syndrome. I'll write this down. Or folk illness. So this is something that you typically don't get when you're not an Algonquin. You don't just run around randomly in, let's say, Mongolia and turn into a Wendigo. They have different legends, so this is very specifically tailored for one culture.
Mm-hmm.
This is why you should never put Wendigos and skinwalkers together, because those are two different directions. One is the American Southwest, and the other one is the Canadian border. They're not the same, and what I see nowadays in a lot of stories is that some people are confusing the two, or are saying, oh, I met a Wendigo in the southern United States. No, you didn't.
It could be going on holiday home. You don't know that.
Oh no, don't say that. Now imagining the Wendigo retiring to Florida.
Hey, you never know, right? I mean, they got to go somewhere eventually, right? They'll eventually run out of food up there. They got to go somewhere else, right? So migration, the Wendigo.
But do you think that is the cause for the Florida Man shenanigans?
Well, they're possessed by Wendigo spirits, but there isn't a full transformation. It's just like the mental aspect. That's an interesting theory. Florida
Yeah,
Man is
but
Wendigo.
yes, but the well, what I'm saying is the Skinwalker is a Navajo concept, and it's at home in the American Southwest. This is something completely different. It's an evil witch, and they often turn into animals, and they turn into them fully. It's not just like a guy with a deer head. It's usually that they turn into coyotes, for example.
Yeah,
So
exotic.
that has nothing to do with the Wendigo lore. You could say that maybe a long time ago they had a common source, but yet it sounds bad when you talk about Wendigos in the Southwest or when you talk about skinwalkers in the North. So keep that apart. Okay. That is the second part of cannibalism. First, we had emergency. Now we have pathological cannibalism, so from people who have mental problems. And the third one is ritual cannibalism. And we're talking about 3 different types. So there is endocannibalism, exocannibalism, and autocannibalism. Autocannibalism actually isn't usually ritualized. It's more, it's closer to the pathological cannibalism. So autocannibalism can be when you're chewing off your own hair. And there are some girls who do that when they're school age, so they keep chewing on their hair. And in some cases, you can find like a 10-pound hairball inside their stomachs. So it's listed under the ritual cannibalism, but it's closer to the pathological one, and the other ones are fully ritual. So what does endocannibalism mean? Endo means inside, exo means outside. In endocannibalism, you only eat people who belong to your group. And that may seem to be a weird concept, but I mean, we're recording too weird to be true, so that is fitting. In endocannibalism, for example, eating people can be part of a funeral. And the most well-known type of endocannibalism is that, for example, elderly people will their body parts to their family, and when they die, then the family eats these body parts. So imagine your granny knows that she's going to die soon, and you're her favorite grandchild. So you get a part of the thigh, and you have to eat that.
Oh, Granny, no. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Is it specifically so with endo? Is it specific to like families, or can it maybe be like a tribe is an endo, or maybe a civilization is an endo, or is it just like a little bit more direct connection?
Well, I have a list of endocannibals. So, for example, in ancient Roman and Greek times, they had explorers telling stories about the Kalatiae. And the Kalatiae were apparently a tribe in India that practiced funerary cannibalism. So they would fry their granny and they would eat her.
Delicious.
That is one thing. In modern days, you have tribes in Peru and Brazil, and you have the Yanomami. We've already talked about them in our stream, and I will show you the cute little jungle pig again. So that is on the border of Brazil and Venezuela. And we have people in Papua New Guinea, because Papua New Guinea is ethno-land. So everything happens there. These are the people. I didn't show them last time, so this is the first time that you're seeing the people. And they are peccary hunters. So some people say peccary, some people say peccari. I think I said peccari last time. A peccary is the smaller cousin of the wild boar. It's a jungle pig, and as you can see, it's also a bit furry, so it looks kind of like a miniature version of a wild boar. And the Yanomami are a hunting and gathering society. They hunt these pigs in the jungle. And in their belief, they have to cut their neighbors' heads off. Because the mother of the Pekaris, which is a goddess to the Yanomami, she demands that, and she wants the heads thrown in the jungle, but only the neighbors' heads. So this is going over into exo-cannibalism. The Yanomami also have endo-cannibalism. They also have a funeral rite that is connected to cannibalism. So in their case, they're both. They eat their own group and they eat outsiders. And I think I told you that this makes actual sense, that they cut people's heads off and throw them in the jungle, and the mother of the Pekaris will give them more Pekaris to hunt. So do you remember how that works?
Yeah, I think I remember us talking about this in the Yanko Zench video, if I remember correctly, because we were talking about pigs. But I believe I remember it because as we were talking about it, like the point is, there's going to be less hunters because obviously you're cutting the heads off of people who hunt the pigs from other tribes or even their own tribe, whatever, throwing them in the woods, which naturally then ends up feeding the pigs as well, which allows them to continue making more pigs. But they're also being hunted less, and that's like the key aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
I pay attention.
Yes, it's great. So yes, they would also eat their own grannies. As far as I know, in their case, they don't even eat the flesh. They cremate the dead and then they eat the ashes. So they bake them into some other food. But they also practice exo-cannibalism. So exo-cannibals only eat people who don't belong to their group, which means they usually eat enemies. And there are a couple of tribes that have practiced this. So it's ritual cannibalism. This means these people don't eat other people because they like the taste. Neither the exos nor the endos eat other people for the taste. They actually don't particularly like to eat people. The endos do it out of love because they want their granny to be with them. So they don't put her in the cold, damp ground where the worms are going to eat her. They eat her so she can be in their stomachs. She can be in a nice warm place with a family. That is the background of this funeral cannibalism. And the exos, they also don't like to eat people, but they will eat enemies, for example. So they will cut off the genitals, or they will cut out the heart, or the upper arm, and in some cases the liver, and they will eat that to gain the strength or the courage of their enemies. That is a common thing, that they eat human flesh or human organs to gain your strength and your courage. So, let me look at the list. People who did this were, for example, the Kalinago. And you're not going to know the Kalinago. They're more commonly known under the name Caribs, and the Caribbean is named after them.
Ah. Okay.
So, that was a tribe that was described as being cannibalistic by Columbus, and the name Carib actually turned into the word cannibal. That is the source of it. So we only have this word cannibal through the Spanish explorers of the Americas, which means that before 1492, we had different words for cannibals.
Oh.
The Caribs ate their neighbors. For example, the Taino. And the Taino were another tribe living in the Caribbean islands. So the Caribs would raid these islands and would capture and eat their neighbors. Yeah, then we have some tribes in Brazil, for example, the Wari. We have tribes in Chile, the Mapuche. We have tribes in Central America, the Aztecs. The old Aztecs also ate people. They didn't just sacrifice them on top of the pyramids, but they also ate parts of them. And the Pueblo Indians in the American Southwest. So we're returning to the skinwalker here. But not the Pueblo Indians as we know them, but they say that the Anasazi, their ancestors, ate people. We have a bunch of tribes in Africa who committed cannibalism, and a lot of them in the Congo, but we'll also get to a more modern example that took place in Uganda. Then we have Austronesian tribes, that is, tribes from Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, for example, and some of them are the Batak and the Dayak. The Fore are also a tribe from Papua New Guinea, and the Fore have developed a prion disease because they eat a lot of human flesh. And they also do both. So they kill people from other tribes and they eat their own dead as a funeral rite. Then in the 4th century, shortly before the Romans left the British Isles, there was a group of people that consisted of Roman military deserters, the native Britons, native Scots and Picts, and the Saxons. I don't know how the Saxons got over in the 4th century, but apparently they belonged to this group. And these people also ate people. But I think this was just a slightly bigger gang of robbers who came from different tribes, who didn't even speak the same language. So we have at least 3 or 4 different languages here among them. And they banded together, they robbed people on the road, and the Roman Empire had to go on a campaign against them and defeat them to stop them, because they wouldn't just steal your handbag, they would actually eat you.
They wouldn't just steal your handbag, they'd steal your hand too.
Yes, exactly. So, and that is Britain. Okay, we have in North America the Iroquois and the Nootka. So the Nootka are a Canadian thing. Again, this is the border between the United States and Canada. So you could say maybe there is something like a Wendigo involved, but these people, for example, ate missionaries, Christian missionaries, and I have one that we can talk about who was tortured and killed and eaten by the Iroquois. Then in the Pacific Islands, you have Maori and Fijians and Marquesans, and again the Papua tribes. All of them exo-cannibals at one point. So I'm not saying that the Maori who still live in New Zealand are cannibals now, but they had cannibalistic rites, for example. And that is a good point, because cannibalistic rites are not something that only happens outside of Europe. We also have Catholic rites that are cannibalistic. Can you imagine what they are?
I mean, are we talking about like the quote-unquote eating of Christ's body and drinking of his blood type deal?
Yes, exactly. Right. So, of course, I have prepared this.
Of course.
In Catholicism, you're supposed to believe that the host during Mass turns into Christ's body and the wine turns into his blood. So if you're taking your Catholicism seriously, you're eating his flesh and drinking his blood.
But yet again, that's like it's like the symbolism aspect of it. It's not truly doing it. So I think that's more like a pathological thing in a way, even though it's ritualistic, because it is, yet again, it's more mental based stuff, isn't it?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Does that mean that they it's interesting because when you really think about it, how many people would actually still choose to follow that doctrine if they actually had to eat like body parts and stuff, you know?
Yes, and imagine someone has taken some pills or some mushrooms and goes to a mass and starts seeing these things.
It's like,
The
I think it's one of
priest
the
will
last
tell you.
places you would go if you did something like that. Church hits different when you're on shrooms. The fuck?
Yes, but there is a very interesting book by an Italian historian. His name is Piero Caporesi, and he wrote the book Bread of Dreams. That is the English title, because there is an English copy of it. And in Bread of Dreams, he explains why there were so many miracles in the Middle Ages. He says, well, people were just hallucinating the whole time. And he's an expert. He's not pulling this out of his ass. So what he says is, during the Middle Ages, it was extremely difficult for people to survive winters. And even when the weather was okay, like it is most of the time in summer in Italy, for example, they still had trouble finding enough food and preserving food. So they usually had many children, and they were trying to keep them alive. A typical family size was around 20 at that time, including the parents. And they would eat rotten food all the time. They would eat things that were poisonous, like they would pick some berries in the forest, and they just ate them because they were hungry. They didn't really care that this stuff would cause hallucinations. And in some cases, they ate stuff that was hallucinogenic, and they didn't even know that. For example, there is ergo, which is a crop fungus, and ergo is the substance that you make LSD from. So it's a very dark fungus that sits on crops. And when you eat that, you start having really bad hallucinations that can feel like schizophrenia or can feel like you're turning into an animal. So, yeah, it's essentially the raw form of LSD. And people
How
would
about
eat that because they had nothing else.
No, I mean you're exactly right. When hunger strikes and desperation, you eat what's available, even if it's not good. But that's I mean that also led to amazing discoveries. Like I mean you got mold, which help form penicillin. You've got fermented
Yeah.
foods inevitably became different types of alcohol, and et cetera, et cetera. Without people doing things that out of desperation or in some cases stupidity, we wouldn't be the same kind of civilizations we are today. You know.
That's right. And people developed strategies to kill off fungus in food. Not the Italians, but in South America, for example, people would add chilies to their food because chilies have antifungal properties. So your food is not going to spoil when you add some chilies, and it's simply too hot for bacteria and fungi.
That's pretty clever. I gotta admit,
That's
it
genius.
makes a lot more sense as to why a lot of, especially Asian cultures, love to use chilies in their food. Makes a lot more sense now. I mean, besides the fact that it's just sometimes delicious, but in some cases they go way over the top with chilies. You know what I mean? That's where I'm like, are you okay?
Yes, and there are also societies in Asia, for example, who use this to kill off parasites because their water is very dirty, and they drink worm eggs and stuff with their water, and they're not cooking it. Um, so they contract parasites, and the hot food is not very good for tapeworms, for example.
Makes a lot more sense now. It really, really does. It's
Yeah.
weirdly genius.
Yes, I mean, it really helps. So people develop these strategies, even if they're not a modern industrialized society. That is something you learn in anthropology, that some peoples really have really good ideas, and that they can prevent problems for the community by simply finding a new substance like chilies. And chilies are a difficult topic because your body thinks that you're getting a cut in the tongue when you eat them. So the pain you feel from eating chilies is the same pain that you feel when you're cut. And you're starting to love this. So eating chilies causes an addiction to that pain, which means it's sort of a masochistic spice. It teaches you masochism.
I see. That might explain why people keep pushing the boundaries with the spice. Huh.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Okay, let's move on. I have some more stuff. So, before we play a little game with cannibals, I need to show you something, and that is the tastiest parts of humans. What would you think are the tastiest parts that you can eat?
I've never had to think about this before. Tastiest parts.
I mean, we've already established that usually cannibals don't eat people because they love the taste. But if you had to, what would you think would be the best parts of someone?
I guess you want parts that have a fair bit of meat. That probably makes sense to me. But then it's like, would you want to have a person who's fatter? Because then that's more of a fat layer. Would that work better? Because I mean, when you think of like steaks and stuff, different fat content can help make something nice.
Yes.
Compared to like a super lean thing. I guess maybe you want a level of fat, right? You don't want it to be overly fat, but I guess a level of fat. I guess maybe the belly area. Then I don't really know.
Okay, let's go into this. So first, let's go to the West Indies. We're going back to the Caribs, and the Caribs thought that palms, fingers, and toes were the tastiest parts, and they're a bit bony. So I don't really know about that, but maybe they liked really lean meat.
That makes sense.
And weirdly enough, they thought that the French were the tastiest people in the world.
Because they ate a lot of garlic? Were they like pre-seasoned or something?
You mean the French are self-seasoning, and that's why they're tasty? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know the logic. That's what I would assume. Maybe because they drink a lot of wine. I mean, that probably helps give a richness. I don't know.
Could be that causes some very good fat to grow. Kobe beef, for example, is made by massaging the cows and giving them beer to drink, because beer causes that fat growth that they like in the meat.
I could be a Kobe cow. That sounds like a good life.
Okay.
Obviously,
all right.
okay.
So I found this very funny with the French, because it shows that they had eaten different kinds of people and they were comparing them.
Yeah. Not my first thought. If I'm ever a cannibal, not that I could even think like that, but I suppose that's an interesting thought of like, what kind of person would you want to be? I would have assumed they all tasted the same, but I guess they don't. How would I fucking know?
Oh, I have caused great danger to the French people by saying this.
Maybe they're the tastiest people. In which case, that's a weird compliment, right? French people, you might be the tastiest people. It's so fucking weird to say. Oh my god.
Okay, let's go away from this. Get even weirder.
Oh, great.
Because the Tatars. So the Tatars are now a group that lives in Russia, and it's the biggest minority in Russia. They have a couple of million people in Russia, and they're mixed. So they have Asian ancestors, but they also have European ancestors. And you find completely different looking Tatars. I have a friend who belongs to that group who looks completely European, but I know he's mixed because they're all mixed. So you don't see the Asian part in him, like not at all. In the 13th century, the Tatars came to Europe, and they caused a little bit of trouble there because, they had demands for dinner, for lunch also, maybe for breakfast. They would want to eat women. And that does make sense. I'm going to explain why that makes sense. They wanted to eat specific parts. So from their point of view, breasts are the tastiest part.
Okay. I mean,
And
cool.
yes, because of high fat content, because breasts consist of little more than fat.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought. So how would that be
That is one
tasty?
thing. And they they had a hierarchy. So the ordinary Tatars, they would have to eat older women because they were a bit tougher. The Tatar officers would get younger women, but they wouldn't get the breasts because those were for high aristocrats. So they're cutting off a part before you even get to it.
Right.
Yeah, so it's understandable that they want a part that has a lot of fat, and it's also understandable that they want women. Because with humans and pigs, you have the situation that testosterone doesn't taste very good in the meat. It's not the same with cattle, for example. So with beef, it doesn't make that big of a difference whether it's a bull or a castrated bull. But with pigs, it does. So there are even specific instruments that farmers use to castrate their very little piglets, because you have to castrate them before the testosterone comes in. And if that happens, if you have a male pig that has already testosterone in it, in that case, the meat almost becomes inedible. There are a couple of people who will still eat that. For example, in France and in Belgium, they do eat these male pigs. But in most other countries, people don't eat them because it kind of tastes like piss. And apparently that's the same with humans. So the hierarchy with humans is, if you have no other choice, you're going to eat men. If you have a choice, you're going to pick women. The younger, the better. And the tastiest, allegedly, are small children, because they're very tender and their meat is sweet. Yeah, and they haven't had too much strain on their bodies yet, so everything is fluffy.
It's a weird word to describe, but okay. Okay. I trust other people's opinions on this. It's not something I think I would ever delve into, but it's informative, and I'm learning things, and it's certainly something.
Yes, I mean, as a man, you would be relatively safe from cannibals. If they have a choice, they're going to eat your girlfriend.
Wonderful. I'll still avoid cannibals, but
Yes.
that's not great news.
Well, the thing is that you could, without any danger, meet endo-cannibals. Like, not those who do both. So avoid those who are endo and exo, because that might be dangerous. But you could visit people who regularly eat their old people when they die, because they don't like the taste of meat. They don't like the taste of human flesh. So they will not touch you. You're not a member of the family, and they don't have to eat you, so they will happily avoid eating you. That is a thing, so that would be relatively safe. And if we're looking into the question what human flesh actually tastes like, it tastes a bit like pork, allegedly. As I said, I haven't tried it. And that is a common way to describe it, because British sailors would call human flesh the long pig. So when they were performing the custom of the sea, and they would eat one of their mates, they would not talk about that person as a person anymore, but they would talk about that person as the long pig.
Right.
But
Didn't know that.
allegedly, it also tastes a little bit like horse.
Definitely wouldn't really know that.
So horse meat is darker, and it's a little bit sweeter in taste than beef. And it's usually not really eaten by most people. So horses are not kept for making sausages or for making steaks. So most people don't know what it tastes like. It's a bit more common in Southern Europe. There are actual places that butcher horses in France and in Spain and in Italy, for example. But most people don't know what it tastes like. But those who know what it tastes like and have also tried human flesh say it's quite similar, because human flesh is also a little bit sweet, as they say, and the color is closer to horse meat than to pork.
Interesting. I know. I know quite a few years back now, but I think still in the 2000s there was a. I think she was a comedian. I'm not entirely sure, but I think she does do a bit of comedy. But in England, she did a little thing where she would have people try a meat. I think it was like for a burger or something. It was just ground up meat, and she wouldn't tell people what the meat was until they had finished eating it, and it was horse meat. I think she was trying to raise awareness that, hey, horse is a potential option for people to consume, and it's not like the worst idea. I never think it really got off the ground, but I remember it being on TV. I thought that was quite fascinating. So we have tried it. It's occasionally it makes the rounds here.
Yes, but the thing is, there was this scandal a few years back where horse meat was found in lasagna, in supermarket lasagna. And people were outraged. One reason for this is that most people don't like to think that they're eating horses because they don't view them as edible livestock. But the other problem is that the horses that were put in those lasagnas were not just average horses. They were sports horses, and they were pumped full with antibiotics. So they'd gotten lots of pills and injections during their career. Because that is what happens to sports horses, they're under constant medical supervision when they're really successful, and you cannot just butcher them and put them in the human food supply, because there are very strict rules concerning antibiotics. You may run into problems when you really need antibiotics, and you've developed I've lost the word.
It's all right.
You've gotten used to it, yeah.
Like an immunity.
Yes,
or,
right.
Something like
it's
that.
It's not the exact.
It's like oh god, I want to say a resistance to it. Like you become a little bit more. You build. I think it should build up an immunity to it. So something like that. But I know what you're talking about.
Yes. So we've both lost the word. That's great. That doesn't make me look so bad.
No. I know what you're talking about, but I'm with you. I don't remember the terminology.
Right. It's somewhere at the back of my mind, but I can't grab it. So the problem is, if you constantly eat meat that has a lot of antibiotics in it, then your body will get used to them, and the microorganisms in your body will also get used to them. So the microorganisms develop a resistance to antibiotics, and that can be very dangerous, because if you have something that can only be treated with antibiotics, and your doctor gives you some, then it may not work, and that is dangerous.
Quite right.
So the discussion about horse meat in lasagna is not a discussion about I love horses so much and I don't want them to be butchered, but it's a discussion about butchering sports horses that are pumped full with medicine.
Yeah, that's a fair argument. 100%.
Okay. I'll show you some more historical or fictional characters. So you've already seen me and my professor. The other one is not opening. Okay. No, he's a psychiatrist, so I wouldn't have studied with him. But what you may not know is that Shakespeare wrote a play about a cannibal.
What's the play?
The Tempest.
Oh, we performed that in high school.
What play?
The Tempest.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
Who did you play?
Our high school did. Well, I wasn't in the play. I wasn't even in the pit orchestra at the time. But yeah, our school was a performing arts school, very very popular with that. I mean, they ended up going to Scotland at one point to perform Bat Boy. But either way, yeah, we performed the Tempest one year. It was
That's cool. Yes, so let me show you the pictures. And Caliban is supposed to be a cannibal. Even the name. Some people say that it plays in the Mediterranean Sea, but others have assumed that it plays in the West Indies, and that Prospero and his daughter are escaping to the New World. This was written in 1610, 1611. It's one of Shakespeare's last plays, and it starts in Italy with Prospero, who is a politician but also a sorcerer, and who has to get away. So I don't think he would just flee the Italian mainland to go to some Italian island. Because in the Mediterranean there's a lot of traffic, so I don't think you could hide in the Mediterranean.
probably.
I think it's likely that he went to the West Indies, specifically because of the character of Caliban, who is presented as a wild man. And the name is definitely taken from the word cannibal. It's supposed to mean cannibal.
I could see that. Yeah, cute little play on the word. Very interesting.
Yes, and then you have another very well-known one. That is Sweeney Todd, the human meat pies.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so our culture is fascinated by cannibalism. We have lots of tales about cannibalism. Even when you go into fairy tales, you have in Slavic mythology the Baba Yaga. That is a witch who lives in a house on chicken feet, so the house can move. It has giant feet.
I think it's great. I love the Baba Yaga.
Yes, and she also eats children. And then, of course, you have in the Grimm's fairy tales Hansel and Gretel. And, they're trying to eat Hansel. So that is rooted in folklore, and it's actually even older than that, because even in Greek mythology, you already have a cannibalistic myth, and that is the myth of Kronos. So have you heard of Kronos? Do you know who that is?
I've heard of Kronos, but I don't know much about Kronos.
Okay, his Roman name is Saturn. And he's the father of the 6 Olympian gods, and that is Zeus and his wife. So I'll use the Greek names, but they also have Roman names. Zeus and Hera are the sky gods, and they're not just siblings, they're also married. We're getting into southern swamp people territory again here.
It happens a lot in mythology, especially if Zeus's name comes up.
Yeah. Then you have Poseidon and Hestia. So Poseidon is the god of the seas, and Hestia is the goddess of the stove fire. They don't have the same element, and they're not married, luckily. But yeah, you have fire and water here. And then you have Hades and his sister Demeter. So also not married, but Demeter, the goddess of the earth, of the soil, and of fertility, has an affair with her brother Zeus. And they have a daughter named Persephone, and her brother Hades marries Persephone.
Yeah. Good old Greek mythology.
Yes, so everyone is related to everyone. And these 6 Olympian gods, Zeus is the youngest of them. And their parents are pre-gods, so they're not really considered gods. They're titans, and titans are large entities with superpowers, but they're excluded from the actual gods. So that is the parent generation. That is the generation that was there before the actual gods came. And Kronos is a very powerful titan, and when his children were born, he got an oracle to tell him a couple of things about them. So the oracle said, "Oh yeah, one of your children is going to kill you."
Yay.
What did he do? He ate his children.
That's one way to deal with it.
He thought, okay, that way they can't do anything to me. I know where they are, although they won't be dead. Because that is actually what happened. It's like with Little Red Riding Hood. When she's eaten by the wolf and the huntsman cuts her out, she's still alive. Same thing with the 6 Olympian gods. They're eaten by their father. Well, 5 of them are. Because their mother actually came in, saw her husband eat the kids, and he asked her to give him the baby, which is Zeus. The others are all older. So she did some very quick thinking, and she wrapped a large stone in a diaper and gave him that stone to eat. And he didn't think she would betray him. He didn't know this was a stone. He swallowed it. And then the mother hid Zeus from her husband, had him raised elsewhere, and he came back and cut up his father and released his 5 siblings.
Wow. And
that is why most of his sisters have the hots for him.
So, just, yeah. Okay.
And this cannibalism in Greek mythology keeps going on. There are more examples. For example, Tantalus. And Tantalus is the guy who stands in water and can't drink, and stands below a tree but can't reach the fruit.
Huh.
So I guess you've heard of him. That is a punishment for him because he served Zeus his own son. So Tantalus was a prankster. He loved to prank people, but he also loved to prank the other gods. And he tried to test them. He wanted to see whether they were really omnipotent and all-knowing. So he killed his son Pelops, and he served his son to the gods. And the gods realized this, so they didn't eat from his son. But Demeter, the goddess of the soil, was grieving because her brother Hades had kidnapped her daughter Persephone and kept her in the underworld because he wanted to marry her. So she was in deep depression, and she accidentally ate Pelops' shoulder.
Okay.
So Zeus said enough with this bullshit, and he sent Tantalus to the netherworld, to Hades, to be punished and kept there for eternity. And eventually Tantalus ended up in the netherworld, but before that happened, they had to try a couple of times to send him there because he would prank death himself. And that caused a lot of problems. They hired Death to bring him to the netherworld, and he outwitted Death, and he bound him so Death couldn't move away anymore, and he was lying under a tree, and Tantalus just ran off, and that caused a giant problem for humanity because Death was not there to take them anymore, so nobody could die anymore.
Oh my god. This is amazing.
Yeah. But we also have Lycaon, who did something very similar. Lycaon was a king who served Zeus, his son. I don't know why they're trying. I mean, he should have known.
It's weird that it's happened more than once.
Yes. So Lycaon is his son is named Nyctimus, and Nyctimus was returned to life by Zeus. And his father was transformed into a wolf. So there is the connection between cannibalism and wolf again, like in clinical lycanthropy. And Lycaon already has it in his name because Lycos is the wolf in Greek. And they have a Mount Lycaon, not Ligeon or something. So Mount Lycaon is the tallest peak in Arcadia, which means in southern Greece. And at the beginning of May, they had the Ligeia festival. And the Ligeia festival came with a delicious stew that contained human flesh.
Oh, wonderful.
So the story goes that they would bring teenagers there, and only male teenagers, because this was kind of an initiation for male teenagers, no girls allowed. They would feed them this stew. They wouldn't tell them what was in it. And when they were finished, they would tell them that the meat they had just eaten was human flesh. And then these young boys would turn into wolves, and they would live as wolves for about 9 years. And then they returned to the mountain and turned back into human.
That's so... That whole thing is so strange. What?
That is how you make a Greek werewolf. So here we have Greek werewolves. This is Lycaon again, the king who was punished. So you see him turning into a wolf there. And this is the Lycaon mountain. That is the area.
Wow. It's quite pretty.
Yes, really nice. And maybe I should explain why these people turned into wolves. So not Lycaon, he had earned it. Like he had tried to serve his own son to Zeus, and
yeah,
you don't
it's his
do
punishment kind of thing. Yeah. But why 9 years? So they specifically have males come try this stew, tell them it's human flesh. They then become wolves for 9 years. But it's not like a transformation like a typical werewolf where you can go back and forth or whatever.
No.
They're a wolf for 9 years, but then they go back to the mountain after the 9 year period and become humans again.
Yes.
Why 9 years? It's very specific.
Well, it's not all young boys of the same age, so it's a distinct few who are called there. And it's believed that this is a remembrance of shamanistic rituals, because shamanism is originally a Eurasian thing, and you still have full-on shamans in Asia. In Europe, they're basically extinct because, they were persecuted as witches. But you can still see some cannibalistic myths that are connected to shamanism. So they are turning into wolves. That is something that shamans do, for example. And they have to live in the wilderness for 9 years. So they're brought there as teenagers, and usually that means between the ages of 11 and 13, which means they would be 20 or in their early 20s when they get back to being human. So it is thought that this could be a shamanistic transformation. This was for boys who would later become shamans, or priests, as you would say now. So they had to experience living as an animal to understand the world in a different way. That could be it.
Okay. Yeah. Shamanism makes a level of sense there. Absolutely.
So that was not a punishment for them, but it showed them a different side of the world. And it also makes sense that they're turned into wolves. So this can be seen as a punishment, especially when you're talking about werewolf mythology now. It's usually a punishment. You're bitten, you have no choice. It's a horrible curse. But back in the times, imagine you have some young boys who get turned into animals. What would happen if they got turned into mice or rabbits? When they're turned into wolves, they can form a pack, they can stay together, and they can defend themselves. They have teeth and claws. So they're not at imminent danger because wolves are one of the bigger predators that lived in Greece at that time. And the thought is that they were turned into wolves to protect them.
But still live as like an animal. Yeah, no, that makes quite a lot. Because I suppose if they were anything, like you said, that was more preyed upon, that's more like a punishment.
Yes.
Interesting.
Okay, we need to get a little bit weirder. And there will be a game at the end of this. I promise I won't make it very difficult. I just want to hear your opinion.
Okay.
So, getting weirder means, in this case, that we're looking at some cases of cannibalism in Asia, and I think you know what comes now when I show you this.
The honeyed meat thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's called the mellified man. I'll write this down. So, melis means honey, and mellified means he is made into honey, or he's made of honey. It's also known, and I didn't know this, I looked some stuff up on Wikipedia to get some additional information, because sometimes they have stuff that is so weird that even I have never heard it. This is also called human mummy confection.
I can, yeah, that weirdly appropriate.
And I know that you said last time it's a candied human.
Yeah, confection or candied. That makes sense.
Ooh. Right. So, the mellified man. Allegedly, this is a tradition from the Middle East. So, the countries that I mentioned are Arabia and Assyria, and sometimes Persia. This was known throughout the Mediterranean world in Rome and Greece. This was also known on the Silk Road. Ancient explorers explained that this was like a self-sacrifice of a person, and usually it would be older men who would do this. There you have the problem with the testosterone again. They would start to eat only honey, and they would sometimes even bathe in honey for about a year. So this means that even their sweat, even their excrements would turn into honey because they ate nothing else. That is realistic because when you look at calves, for example, calves drink milk from their mothers, and they have a very light brown cow pie in the end. Because this cow pie is made of milk. This cow pie is actually sweet. I haven't tried it. But dogs prefer to eat calf poop because it's sweet. So that actually affects what comes out of you when you're fed with milk, and nothing but milk. And with honey, it's probably the same. So these people were not allowed to eat anything but honey, and we've already made fun of it and said that, wow, that is a good way to get diabetes. But sure. I don't think that the people who mellified themselves would have cared because they were going to die anyway. At the end of this treatment, they would put themselves into a coffin, and then this coffin would be filled with honey, and they would be suffocated in honey. So, they just filled the thing up until the person had died in it. And then they would close the coffin, they would seal it, and they would wait for a while. And it's there are different sources saying different things. In some cases, they would keep them in there for another year or so, but that could vary. And at the end of this process, when they took the person out of the honey coffin, that person's flesh would have turned into some kind of sweet jelly. So the texture had also changed. It wasn't recognizable as meat anymore.
Well, it's a weird thought.
And then these mellified men would be cut into pieces, and you wouldn't recognize that this had been a human at one point, because it looked so different. You wouldn't even be able to tell by the structure of the flesh that this had once been human. You would just get this little jelly cube. And allegedly, this was used to cure basically everything. No matter what disease you had, you ate a piece of mellified man and you became immortal.
Wow. Not true, but, hey.
Yeah, so probably not immortal, but they actually saw this as a medicine. And that is another point that... in some cases, people think that human flesh can be used as a cure for certain things. So, in Africa, for example, you have people who are albinos. They still look African, they have an African facial structure and hair, but they're essentially as white as someone from Finland.
Yeah.
And these albinos are hunted down because witch doctors think that their body parts are valuable for magic. And in some cases, their body parts are eaten. For example, to cure AIDS.
Okay. Well.
That can happen. And we can't laugh about this at all. We can't laugh about the mellified man in the Middle East either, because, we have Mumia Vera. This is taken from a European pharmacy. So maybe you've seen some of these jars in old pharmacies. That's how they stored things, or in doctors' offices. They also sometimes have those. Do you remember what this was? I think we talked about it.
I don't think I remember. Is it ashes?
It's mummy.
Oh. It's coming back a little bit.
It's mummy that is used for medical purposes. And I know this sounds so crazy. So let me show you a little bit of what the actual mummy looked like that's in it. You can see these brown, black, grayish parts. And you would also not think that this is a former human being.
No, that's true.
So Mumia Vera means real mummy. Vera means real. They were selling this, they were marketing this in European pharmacies, and also a little bit in the Middle East, because that is where it came from. But in the 18th and 19th century, people started to develop an interest in eating mummies. And I'm not making this up.
Okay.
The thing is, they thought, okay, Egyptian mummies are embalmed with spices and herbs and with oils and all kinds of stuff. So after they had dried them out, they would actually embalm them with some nice things that smelled good and that probably tasted good. So it was kind of a herbal remedy. And people in Europe bought this, and they tried to cure broken bones with this. So let's say you're in 19th century England, and you break your leg, and your mom comes in with this and says you have to eat this, and don't ask what it is.
Wonderful.
And I can't even imagine what it would be like. It's probably like seasoned beef jerky, to be honest.
So I have a hypothetical question for you then.
Yes.
You know the you know the English Christmas Carol Scrooge tale?
Yes.
If Tiny Tim's family were richer, do you think that they would have had to eat a bit of that in the hopes it would? Oh my god!
I mean, Scrooge could have bought it for them after he had become a better person.
Oh my god! It's such a weird thought, isn't it? He just bursts to the house. He's full of the Christmas spirit now, and he's like, "Hey, I got your son a bit of Mummy of Error. Try a bit of this. Don't ask questions."
Yeah, look, it's really like beef jerky. No problem.
It'll cure you up, kid.
Like, when I imagine this, then I feel like it should be dusty and extremely dry, like almost like dry paper. But I'm pretty sure that it has this jerky quality. Because, they eventually ran out of real mummies. So most of this wasn't even mumia vera anymore. It was just mumia. Because this became so popular in parts of the world, and Europe was one of them, was probably the biggest market for this, that people couldn't dig up enough mummies in Egypt anymore. They ran out of mummies.
They ran out of mummies.
Which means they started making mummies because it was a great business idea. So they killed people, and they dried them and embalmed them, and then they sold them to Europe. And which means some of this stuff was really ancient, was probably from people who have been dead for 4,000 years, and some of this stuff was pretty fresh. Same price, though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you go through all the hassle to make your own mummies. Like, of course it's the same fucking price. It might even be a premium. The fuck?
Like, look, this one is still juicy.
Oh my god. Yeah, do you want the non-jerky version? Okay.
Yes. At one point, we will have to make a short video about the horrors of Victorian age food, because this was not the only thing that was mocked in the 19th century. So they had a lot of mock food, and allegedly there used to be a machine that was constructed to make very little wood splinters, because people would not sell jam. They would sell red color, so liquid color, and they would throw these little wood splinters into the color to make it seem as if it was gooseberry jam. So they they went to lengths to make it look like the real stuff, but they were actually selling toxic paint to people.
I can believe that. I can absolutely believe that.
Yes, and Victorian age meat pies were also full of mystery meat, as you have seen with Mrs. Lovett's pies.
You just get what you get, right?
But there's more. So this is enough for another small video. But let's close this off and let's get into the game, because I have some cases of cannibalism, worldwide cases. Oh. And I'm going to show you again what the 3 different types of cannibalism are. And by the way, Alexander the Great was allegedly preserved in honey so they could transport him. He didn't become a full mellified man, but it was similar to the situation with Lord Nelson. And I stumbled across the source for this, where I had it from with Lord Nelson. I was a little bit wrong because they didn't preserve him in like 98% rum. They preserved him in brandy. And they argued that they drank the brandy because it would have been a waste to just pour it out.
Of course, it'd just be a waste.
Yes. So they brought him home to his own funeral in a barrel of brandy, and they kept drinking from that throughout the sail home.
I mean, you can't waste it, you know. God, not gonna toss it overboard. That'd be bad.
Yeah. I mean, I hope they didn't like it and didn't start putting people in brandy to make it tastier.
And have mummy brandy.
Exactly. Yeah, that is what we're all afraid of. Okay, for a little game, I want you to categorize the cases that I tell you about, and some of that will be really quick, but some of it will not be that easy. So I have the continents here, and you can tell me a continent, and then I will tell you the name of a cannibal or the name of a person who was eaten, because that also happens. In some cases, we have the names of the people who were eaten. Wow. And then I want you to say whether it's emergency, psychosis, or ritual.
Got it.
Okay, which continent would you like to start with?
What are the options? Just any?
Well, Antarctica is not in it and Australia is not in it. The other continents, we have Africa, Asia, North America, and then Latin America, which is South, Central, and Caribbean. And we have Europe.
I guess we'll start with Europe.
Okay, then let me see what we didn't have yet. I've crossed some off already because we've talked about them.
Right.
Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, in 1192, allegedly ate Saracen heads. So he beheaded his enemy, the Saracens, Muslims, and ate the heads with curry. What would that be from your point of view?
I would say he probably did it because he believed it was a ritualistic thing.
Yes.
So I would say it would be, if it were a ritual, it would naturally be exo.
Yes. Right. He ate his enemies, so that is pretty clearly exo.
I mean,
Great.
If you ask me, it's more pathological, but I believe his notion was because of ritualistic purposes. Maybe
well,
to gain
we
strength
don't actually know whether this is true. It's a rumor that came up. It's possible that they made it up because, why would you eat heads? They're not that tasty. I mean, you would go for breasts, or if they don't have breasts, for other parts like the belly that are tastier. This is why we talked about what's the tastiest part.
I suppose if it is true, though, then maybe it was for intimidation reasons?
That could be, yeah. Yeah, and that isn't even in the 3 categories. Okay,
yeah, right.
I will give you another one that is from England, that is William Buckland. And William Buckland lived in the 1800s. He's the guy who coined the term dinosaur. And he found the Megalosaurus. So he was very involved in the whole dinosaur thing when it came up. And he ate a piece of mummified heart. And it was a piece of mummified heart that came from France. Because during the French Revolution, people had dug up the Sun King, Louis XIV, and had found that he was fully or partially mummified. They cut out his heart and sold it. And it made its way to England. And William Buckland liked to eat weird stuff. there is a whole society of people like him, and Charles Darwin was also a member of this society, but again, that will be another short video. They ate all kinds of stuff. They ate dolphins, they ate elephant trunks. So William Buckland ate part of the mummified heart of the French king.
Well, that still feels ritualistic in a sense, because usually the notion is that they're attempting to gain some kind of power or benefit is why they would eat those specific body parts. I think it's insane, but it doesn't sound like it's pathological.
Yeah, I would place this under psychosis actually. It's very tricky. It's not emergency. It's not really ritualistic, in my opinion. I think he just had this pathological curiosity.
Well, I suppose, yeah, because I mean, he clearly knowingly bought this and chose to eat it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, do you want to pick another continent? I've just seen that Latin America is actually completely covered, so it's all crossed out. We'll take that out. And so Africa, Asia, North America, or Europe? What do you want next?
Let's go Asia.
Okay. Asia. We have Issei Sagawa in 1981. He was a Japanese man. He studied in France, and he felt very ugly, specifically compared to Europeans. So European men at that time were a lot taller than Japanese people, and Japanese people have grown since because they've changed their habits. So within 30 years, Japanese men grew about 15 centimeters. And that is because they changed what they ate. Traditional Japanese food will keep you very lean. And they also changed how they sat. So traditional Japanese dinners have people sitting on the floor. And when they started using chairs, they suddenly grew taller because it affects the skeleton in a different way. So that's why I'm saying that in 1981, Japanese men were a lot smaller than European men. And a lot scrawnier than European men. So from his point of view, these were tall, beautiful people that he couldn't compete with. But nowadays you also have much taller and much bulkier Japanese people. He ate a co-student in France, a co-student from the Netherlands, a woman. And he thought she was very beautiful, and he was hoping that he could acquire her beauty if he ate her. So where would you place that?
Pathological.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it is also a little bit exo, because exo-cannibals are trying to acquire the strength of their enemies.
True, but this doesn't feel like it's part of a like a thing that he's normally thought about. This almost feels like a spur of the moment desperation tactic, which I feel was led on because he wanted to. I mean, you're quite right. Obviously, he wants to acquire something of them, but it feels desperate compared to ritualistic.
Yes, it's not something that he would do regularly.
Exactly.
That is true.
So that's why I personally lean more pathological. But I could see why you would think ritualistic. I think it is a funky border.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you another one. And that is another Japanese person. Shoichi Murakami in 1996. And in this case, he's not the cannibal. He's the person who was eaten. He was murdered by the Yakuza. Let me show you the two. So, this is Issei Sagawa, the cannibal, and
he's got the Dahmer glasses.
Yeah, a lot of psychopaths seem to like them. These beautiful gentlemen in their tighty whities are the Yakuza.
I'm sorry. I'm not meaning to laugh at the Yakuza.
Not at all.
Very strong.
We have no death wish.
No.
Okay. Shoichi Murakami in 1996 got into trouble with these guys. And apparently he couldn't solve the situation in any other way. So they caught him, dismembered him, and they left his body parts at a restaurant. And I don't know the entire history of this. So whether this was a restaurant that belonged to someone who belonged to the Yakuza and that person knew what they were serving, or whether they sold the meat under false pretenses. But the restaurant made soup out of Shoichi Murakami, and about 50 people ate this soup, and they loved it.
God, I mean, because this, it makes me want to say emergency, but it's not an actual emergency. It's more accidental, isn't it? Circumstance. But I guess you're right. Did the restaurant know for sure what they were doing, or was it a mystery meat type situation? So I'd say accidental's not a choice, but it feels accidental.
Yeah, right. I wouldn't categorize this in the three that we have. I would say this is people accidentally eating human flesh and they didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
Okay, another continent.
Let's go Africa.
Okay, Idi Amin. Have you heard that name before?
Don't think so.
That was in 1973. He was the dictator of Uganda, and he belonged to a tribe that is called Kakua. And the Kakua tribe does have cannibalistic traditions. Doesn't mean that they absolutely have to eat human flesh. But in this case, Idi Amin did. So he had one of his ministers murdered, as dictators like to do. And he had the body thrown into a river. The man's name was Michael Ondanga. I'll show you Idi Amin. And I don't have a picture of the victim. I tried to find one. So this is Idi Amin. And they didn't throw the complete body into a river because Idi Amin cut out the liver, cut off a piece of the liver, and ate it. Because in his tribe, they believe that when you murder someone and you eat a part of their body, then the ghost of that person can't haunt you.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Because that feels ritualistic exo.
Yes. It's an enemy at that point.
Yeah. Even though they're not really gaining a personal benefit, it's more like they're gaining a negative thing for other people. But I'd still say exo for sure.
Yes, it's not a funeral rite at that point because you don't like the person. You don't eat them because you want them to be with you for the rest of your life. You eat them because that will keep the ghost away.
Yeah.
So that is exo, definitely. Okay, I'll give you another one from Africa, the Bafumbanso tribe. And that must be a tiny tribe because I couldn't even find a picture of them. The Bafumbanso, they have a tradition of catching people from other tribes. And they like to catch teenagers. And, in their early teens or pre-teens even. They castrate the boys, but they eat boys and girls. So they don't discriminate. They're probably feminists. Sorry.
Accidental feminism.
Yes. So they have these young people and castrate the males because it makes the meat tastier. And what makes it even more tasty is killing them in a specific way. They give them an enema made of boiling palm tree oil before they eat them.
Oh my god. Oh, okay.
So, how does that sound?
Well, that sounds pathological, but I think the intention is it's still ritualistic.
Yes.
But that's
It's not
fine.
emergency. It's not. Well, it could be pathological, but it's a tradition in the tribe.
It's definitely a tradition, but I think it clearly has a level of pathological tendency in there. But it definitely feels ritualistic.
Yes, and what makes it ritualistic is that it's all very planned out. The age of the children, the sex of the children, the castration, the very specific method of killing them. Um, and it isn't saying that they eat these kids because they're enemies, but they're from different tribes. So it could be a Yanomami situation where they're taking out their competition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is EXO, definitely. Okay, another continent. Didn't have North America yet.
I guess we gotta do North America. Let's do it.
Okay, we have the Iroquois tribe of the northern United States, and the year is 1649. There were missionaries. Let me show you a picture. So you can see the two guys here, and the older one on the right is Father Jean de Brébeuf, a French missionary. And at that time, the French were in the area, so it is that far back that North America was not clearly in English hands. You still had some Dutch people running around and some French people, and the French people were in southern Canada, well, southeast Canada, and in a part of the eastern United States. There was more than one missionary, but I don't think that the background figures were also there. As far as I know, there were only two, and the two in the foreground. The Iroquois caught them and tortured them, and then they cooked them and ate them. I guess they really didn't like what they had to say.
Yeah, right.
Okay, let's see. What do you make of the Wendigo? Oh, by the way, do you want to guess what this was, or tell me what that was?
Um, I mean, it doesn't feel emergency.
No.
It doesn't quite hit ritualistic. So I'd probably say there's pathological tendency to it.
Could be because it was an event that took only place once.
Yeah.
Because, you know, these missionaries were rare. You didn't run into them every day. So, yes, I respect that it is pathological from your point of view. But they also did this with other tribes members. So, with the neighboring tribes, for example, they would torture them, would cook them, and eat them. In that context, I would say it's exo because you're taking out enemies.
Yeah.
Good. So, how do you view the whole Wendigo thing? The cannibalism that we talked about in winter, and the cursed being that comes from it.
Definitely not emergency. I mean, obviously, if it was starving and it had to find a way to get meat, then yeah, I suppose that kind of becomes emergency. But it's definitely,
Yes.
I think the Wendigo really kind of hits all the categories when you think about it, because it's doing it because clearly it's like one of its only food sources. I don't really know of any other things that the Wendigo eats, which is kind of weird, but I guess that's just part of the curse thing, right? Whatever the entity is, that's taking control and doing the actions. But obviously, if it is specifically targeting people for the food, then I feel like that's pathological, but also maybe a level of I don't know. It's hard to say if it falls anything under ritualistic because I don't feel like it does it for a benefit, but clearly this is something that it feels pathological, I would say.
Yes, and I would agree that it's more than one category because it's on one side it is emergency because people are starving and are driven to eat human flesh in some cases.
Yeah.
And the other side is it's pathological because they know very well that this is a big taboo that you shouldn't break. So people will try to avoid this. And as I said, elderly women, they are usually the ones who have a higher life expectancy. So the men often die earlier than the older women. So there are not as many grandfathers. There are grandmothers, leftover older women who were treated as witches in Europe, for example. So they were not productive anymore, and people would kill them as witches because they had accumulated a great deal of knowledge throughout their lifetimes, and they were not useful to the community anymore. Specifically after Christianization happened, because at that point you get actual doctors. You don't have to go to a witch anymore with your back pain. So that was something that fueled witch hunts in Europe, that they were able to take out unproductive members of society, like these older women. And in Native American societies, these older women would take out themselves. They would leave the society they had lived in all their lives. They would go into the forest and essentially commit, well, we can't say that word. They would delete themselves, either by dying from exposure or from being attacked by wild animals and being killed by wild animals, like there are bears and wolves around, of course. So that does have something ritualistic because they're trying to protect the community and they're trying to ward off the evil spirits. Because if they go, they don't need to eat anything anymore. So maybe their family has more food and nobody needs to become a Wendigo.
Mm. Yeah. All
Yes, I
three
would
boxes.
say it has traits of all three. Okay. Do you want to try another European one?
Hit me with it.
James Cook. What do you know about James Cook?
The name sounds familiar, but it's not
Captain
coming
James
off the top
Cook?
of my head. Yeah, it rings a bell, but I don't know why.
Okay, he's an explorer. And he explored the Pacific Ocean, Australia. It is not completely clear whether this actually happened. So a lot of the history of Antarctica is unclear, but it is thought that James Cook was one of the first people who ever saw the Antarctic continent. He died in 1779 in Hawaii, and he's not a cannibal. He is the meal. They got into trouble with the Hawaiians. He landed on Hawaii with his ships, and they somehow got into an argument. So the Hawaiians attacked the British, and they managed to kill the captain. And he ended his life as a Hawaiian buffet. And his people found some pieces of fried meat and some bones from him that they brought home. So they stayed in the area. They waited until the Hawaiians were done eating, and then they tried to collect what was left of the body.
Well,
And they,
I guess the question really is, were the native Hawaiians at the time cannibalistic at all? Because if not, then pathological. But if they were, then maybe a level of ritualistic.
yes, it's difficult to say because we don't really have that many reports about cannibalism in Hawaii. I would say probably ritualistic, probably exo, because this could also be the theme of taking out an enemy again. You don't know what Cook said about their moms. Maybe he called them fat.
Hey, true.
So, um, might be could be pathological. So if they really were not that cannibalistic, if it was an exception that they made, then they must have hated him a lot. And I'll give you another one, and that one is much closer to our times. We're talking about World War II. And it's an English thing, but it's also a German thing. So this one might shock you. Let me get the guy. So this is Lord Woolton, and he was responsible for feeding the British in World War II. I think you know where this is going.
I get a weird feeling, yeah.
Yeah. This is a Lord Woolton pie. And there is no human flesh in it. This is just a pie. But I probably wouldn't eat this because I would have to think of the story of Lord Woolton. So he didn't kill anyone, he didn't eat anyone, he didn't encourage people to kill and eat other people. But he and the German SS at that time had the same plan. Both came up with that plan. None of them actually went through with it, but they developed these plans independent from each other. So Lord Woolton said, well, we have an awful lot of blood conserves, and blood is actually edible. So well, we've talked about this when I told you about the nutritional value of blood. And the problem is that it starts to decay pretty quickly. Okay, the red blood cells, they have a life expectancy of about 4 weeks in the human body. When you take them out, they still have a life expectancy of 4 weeks if you treat them nicely. But the problem is that after that, the red blood cells in these bags are dead. So you can't use this blood for surgery anymore. Right. It wouldn't do anything because the cells that carry oxygen around, these cells are all dead, so it's dead blood. And it doesn't do anything in your body. I mean, you can give it and it's probably going to fill you up, but what you need is living blood that can actually transport oxygen through the body. And people were donating blood like crazy in the parties that took part in World War II. So they were doing this in England, they were doing this in Germany. And a lot of these blood bags would spoil because they were not used. And Lord Woolton came up with the idea to use these spoiled blood conserves that were theoretically still good, just not usable for surgery, to make an English dish. And it's not just an English dish. It also exists in Germany, and that is black pudding. Black pudding is a sausage that is made of blood, and usually pig blood. But it would be possible to use the blood from these blood bags, which is human blood, and make blood sausages from it. And as you know, food was rationed not just in England, also in Germany at that time. And people had these little food stamps, and they got very little meat at that time. And they already knew that blood has the same nutritional value as meat. So this would have given them a lot more protein. This would have helped the population. And Lord Woolton talked to the Red Cross and asked them whether they would do this. And they said, well, we could do this, but we think that people won't want to eat it. This is a staple in English breakfast. But they thought that if people knew that this was human blood, they wouldn't want it.
It's fair
And
assumption.
so the plan was dropped, and the SS in Germany dropped it for the exact same reason. They came up with the same idea. They talked to hospitals and said, "Hey, you have all this stuff. Don't pour it out. We might need it. We might make good use of it." And then they came to the conclusion that but people are not going to eat this.
Yeah.
And it's perfectly clean, so as long as the blood isn't contaminated, there would theoretically not be a problem with eating this, but it's the thought.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just like you said, the taboo aspect of it. Because it's still, whether you consider it emergency cannibalism or not, the fact is it is still a form of cannibalism, and that's the part that people will have an issue with.
Yeah. So
Which
I
I
would
would
also
be the
say
same.
it's emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then we're through with that part of the game. I'll tell you about some cannibalism committed by groups. There was some cannibalism during the English famine from the Irish, sorry. Yeah, okay. The Irish famine, 1845 to 1849. 1/3 of the Irish starved to death. Another third emigrated, mostly to the United States and Australia. And there was 1/3 left of the population that made it. And this is not a real person. This is a statue in Dublin. So if you ever get there, you can look at this. From this time, the Irish have a joke, and that is, how many potatoes do you need to kill an Irishman? And the answer is none.
It's a terrible joke.
Yeah. Yes, but this was a very bad situation. So surprisingly, there wasn't that much cannibalism, but it did happen, and you have other events like this, like the Holodomor event in Ukraine in 1932 to 1933. You can see that even the horse is starving to death. And this statue of the little girl is that thin because she's dying. That, along with famines in Soviet Russia and famines in China, was a result of communism. Because in communism, they tried to replace the farmers with people who had no idea how to farm. So they did this in Ukraine. That is why the Holodomor happened. They did this in China during the Cultural Revolution. And in the Cultural Revolution, they had the Red Guards. So those were the hyper-communistic guys. And they were very proud that they ate rich people, class enemies. So the eat the rich, that comes from that time. They would prefer to eat rich people, not because they tasted better or they were fatter, but they were eating them because they were enemies. So this is exo again. While the Irish thing is emergency, and the Holodomor and the Russian famines, that was emergency too. Millions of people starved to death because farmland was taken away from the farmers, and the farmers were forced to do something else. And the farmland was given to people who didn't know shit about farming. So that collapsed the system of supplies throughout the country. And the cities were the first that suffered, because in the countryside, like let's say you're somewhere in the middle of Siberia, you have a little house, you're a little old granny, and your whole basement is full of pickles, you're probably going to survive that. You're not going to survive that in a city like Moscow or Beijing.
Exactly. Mass populations, but no way to produce food.
Right. So sometimes these are just mass events Two more that we know of are the Donner Party in the United States. Do you want to say something about that?
Do I want to say something about that?
I don't know. I thought you may have learned about this in school, but it's okay if you
Um,
don't.
so surprisingly, I didn't learn about it in school, but I did learn about it on YouTube. Funnily enough, from two guys, Ryan and Shane, who used to be part of BuzzFeed, but now do their own channel, Watcher. Really good, really good. They covered it.
Okay, I have pictures for that. This is the Donner Party. Yeah, they were settlers who were moving to the West Coast, and they ran into trouble and started eating each other in 1846. So traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast was very, very dangerous back then. And before they started eating people, they started eating everything that they could find, including the skin of their cattle that was left over from butchering the cattle. And they ate the skin with the hair on. And they also cooked their own leather boots and tried to eat them.
Yeah,
And
desperate
only
times,
then
you try whatever.
Sorry?
I was just saying, desperate times, you try whatever you can. Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So that was a whole party of people who starved and who started eating each other. So again, you have murderers and you have victims here, and some people were both. They first started eating people who didn't belong to the group, so they ate their native scouts first. And that is something that happens in these emergency situations. Like, at first, you will start eating the animals, and you will eat the cattle before you eat the horses. You will eat the horses before you eat the dogs, because the horses are closer to your heart than the cattle. You were going to eat the cattle anyway. The dogs are closer to your heart than the horses because they're family members.
Yeah.
When you start eating people, you start eating the strangers first, and well, you will probably not eat the children first.
Yeah.
So
if
it
you have
goes
to eat your own
from,
family, you start with like the oldest, wouldn't you?
right, like the granny, for example. So she has lived her life and she's sacrificing herself to keep us alive, so that's fine. Right. We don't know whether this also happened with the Lost Franklin expedition, and we've talked about this 2 times already. Because we ran into Francis Crozier 2 times in the Janko Zensch video. And what was the other one? I'll find it. So, yeah, this is a very well-known painting. It shows polar bears tearing apart the remains of the equipment that the Franklin expedition brought there to the Arctic. You can even see like a human rib cage in the right part of it with a right polar bear.
Oh, yeah.
So these people, they tried to find a Northwest Passage. They tried to sail through the north of Canada. They didn't know that they would freeze there. So the ships actually froze to the pack ice and they couldn't move anymore. This is why they left the ships and they attempted to walk to the inhabited parts of Canada, which was a very bad idea. And they may have made it, but the problem was that the Navy had done something that would ultimately kill them. The Navy had bought cheap cans. So they had given them canned food. And the Navy took the cheapest offer from a Romanian gentleman who had a factory in Romania and in England. And he didn't really know what he was doing. So he was supplying the Navy, but he was not formally educated on how to make canned food, which is why some of his cans were not properly sealed. And that means that the food started to rot. It developed botulism, and that means that when you ate from these cans, you would start to hallucinate, and then you would die. It's a very, very strong poison. And botulism, so that is the same as Botox. But you inject Botox into your face, and you hope that nothing bad happens. But it's actually a super strong poison.
Oh.
And the other half of the cans had been sealed correctly, but they had spilled some of the lead they sealed it with. So there was lead seeping into the food, and that also caused hallucinations and suffocation, because that is one effect of ingesting lead, that you will start to suffocate. So I would say that probably 98% of their food supply was either rotten or poisoned.
God.
And they had some chocolate with them, but for some reason they didn't eat that.
Fools. Well, I suppose, to be fair, they thought the canned food would be fine. It's an understandable thought.
Yes, at one point they started to pick up on the problem that the canned food wasn't fine. So they
sure they would have figured it out.
Yeah, they probably the doctors, so they started to find out that something was wrong with the cans. They threw them away. We've actually found cans that were opened but were not touched. And not even polar foxes would touch it. They could probably smell the botulism or the lead or something like that. So, I don't know what kind of chocolate that was. There is actually a type of chocolate that is made with cattle blood. And that chocolate still exists. And I can send you some if you want to.
I don't know if this country will accept it.
Maybe you can buy it in a Russian store. So if there is an Eastern European store, they will have it.
Oh,
because
what's it called?
Sorry?
What's the chocolate called?
Gematogen.
Huh.
So the Russian one is written with G. That is Gematogen. The one with the Latin letters is hematogenas. Because in Russian you switch out G and H sometimes. So words that are written with an A are with an H are sometimes written with a G in Russian.
I found one on Amazon.
Okay. Yeah, I've eaten that. It's not bad. Little backstory for that is chocolate used to be made with blood. All chocolate used to be made with blood. Until about the last quarter of the 19th century. So it's possible that the Franklin expedition chocolate had regularly blood in it. That was not an extra, that was not put in there for any other reason. It could be that it just had blood in it because that's how chocolate was made. And it had blood in it because blood helps to coagulate the chocolate soup. So when you make chocolate, you make a soup from chocolate and milk and sugar, and it's liquid. And to make it harden, you add beef blood. And that helps with it. So it's not for the taste, and you can't taste it. When you eat this chocolate, you will not taste anything that is like flesh or blood. Right. It's really only there for its chemical properties. And at the end of the 19th century, people started developing other chemicals that could do that. So nowadays you don't have blood in chocolate anymore, but in the Soviet Union, they kept producing this blood chocolate because it's rich in protein. As we said, blood has the same nutritional value as meat. So I know someone who was a little bit weak as a little boy, who grew up in the Soviet Union, and he had to eat this chocolate. His mom gave him the chocolate because they thought he needed to eat more meat, but they couldn't afford meat. So this was the cheaper alternative, and that was supposed to help him grow stronger.
Well, it's quite fascinating. Well, to scare the Western viewers, if you guys want me to buy some of this chocolate and eat it and do a little review, I'll do it, but only if you demand it. Need at least 5 people, to tell me to do it, and then I'll do it.
Guys, we need comments.
Yeah, exactly. If you want it, fine. I will try it. I think it'll be fine. I mean, I like English black pudding anyway, so like it's not the weirdest thing for me to eat animal blood in some way, shape, or form.
It doesn't taste like that, so don't worry.
I don't think it'll taste like a blood pudding at all.
No.
I think it'll taste like chocolate. But just to spook them, I'll do it. I don't care. I'll eat chocolate for a video. I don't give a fuck.
Yes, and it's not cannibal chocolate.
No, because like I said, it's cow blood, so it's...
Yeah. Right, so there we have the groups. Another very weird thing is that there was a time in China where they actually had meat markets for human flesh. That was during the Tang Dynasty. It's often seen as the best dynasty in China. And everything looks like a fairy tale. So it's similar to European Middle Ages. When you see people in these medieval clothes, you immediately think of fairy tales. And that's the same here. That's what people looked like in the Tang Dynasty. And they actually had markets for human flesh because at that time it was legal to sell that. They had completely open markets, not black market.
I suppose if it's legal, then you can't really argue, can you?
No. But it shifted. So there was also a famine in the 200s BC in China where people ate other people. And during the Cultural Revolution again, people sold human flesh and ate human flesh. So it wasn't always legal in China, but apparently during the Tang Dynasty it was. Marco Polo had something to say about that. As you know, he visited China. So in 1275, he heard from Southeast Asia while he was in China that feet are actually the most tasty parts of humans. Because there was a tribe with a foot fetish in Southeast Asia, apparently. Yeah, I wouldn't say that is particularly tasty, but yeah, that was my almost my last point. Sorry, Fijians, for example, are chewing on human meat like other people chew tobacco. And that is the last point. I will not go into the serial killers that we have. So the absolute majority of serial killers that also ate people lived in the United States. We have 6 serial killers here that ate people in the United States. And then we have one from 1920s Germany. That is the only other serial killer who also ate people, and he was known as the vampire killer, so possibly not even eating the flesh. Yeah, we have them. I have pictures, but you can look that up. It's Ed Gein, Albert Fish, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Webber, Alfred Packer, and Adolf Lütgert. And Adolf Lütgert was not a serial killer technically. He killed his wife Louise in 1870. And because he was a butcher and sausage merchant, he put her in his sausages.
I see.
So, we're almost through. Last point, there is a reason why people believe that cannibalism is made up. I've shown you a lot of examples now. So we have a lot of evidence that proves that people actually ate other people. And the funny thing is, as we showed with the game, that cannibalism happens on basically every continent. I don't have an example from Australia, but you can bet it's happening there too, or it did happen there too. Antarctica is not inhabited, so we can take that one out. But cannibalism is not a class thing. So it doesn't just happen in feral tribes. It doesn't just happen among people who are very well educated and rich. Everyone does it on every continent. So why do people actually believe that it's made up? Do you have an idea why this could be happening?
The most obvious guess I would have is it's simply that people don't want to believe in it because it is just such a crazy taboo that they essentially don't want to devalue humanity in that kind of a way. But I suppose it's just like too bizarre and fantastical for some people to comprehend. But quite frankly, there are animals that believe and eat their own kind if they're dead or stuff like that. I mean, I don't see how people can argue against it personally.
Well, there is one reason, and you're absolutely right that it is also a thing that people don't want to believe because it's so inhumane. People have a feeling if they acknowledge it, that would devalue humanity. That is right, but there is another reason. And that is that, very early on in Christianity, Christians were arguing that if you become a Christian, you will not be enslaved by other Christians. That was one selling point of Christianity. When it became the state religion in the Roman Empire, they made it very clear that slavery was off the table. So for a moment, Christianity ended slavery. But of course it came back. So they've left open a little back door. And Christianity said you can't enslave any other people. They even extended this and said not just Christians, it would be best if you didn't enslave anyone. But, when it's better for the person to be enslaved than to be free, then you can enslave them. And the argument that they accepted when it would be better for a person to be enslaved than to be free, that was when that person was a cannibal. So they said, if you find cannibal tribes, that is a very, very, very big sin. God doesn't like this. And although we are against slavery, we would say that it's okay to enslave people who are cannibals because you would pull them away from committing this giant sin. You would actually help them by enslaving them. That far, we're coming with a theory. And when the Spanish started to explore the Americas in the late 15th, early 16th century, they found actual cannibals. So we know that the Caribs were cannibals, but they also started to make up cannibals. And this is something that goes through the age of exploration. Although there are legitimate cannibal tribes on almost every continent, except for Antarctica, for example, people started making up more cannibals than there were because it gave the Spanish and later on also other nations an excuse to enslave people.
I see.
It was that little back door that they needed because when you talk to people who study theology, they will tell you, hey, we had solved this. We don't actually know why the transatlantic slave trade happened because Christians are not supposed to do that. And that is the answer to that. The black slave traders in West Africa who sold other black people to the Portuguese, who transported them to the Caribbean and then to North America, for example, they would say that, yes, of course, these people are cannibals. You need slaves, so they must be cannibals, right? And that is the reason why many people don't trust this and say it is completely made up, because they know that during the age of exploration, there were lots of false cannibals. And this, for example, was also used as an argument by Columbus himself when he kidnapped the people of the Bahamas that we talked about in the Uncle Zench video. He completely emptied this group of islands, and he brought the people over to Hispaniola to work on farms. He argued that, yeah, they're Caribbeans, maybe not Caribs, but, they're cannibals. And that's why I can take them and why I can enslave them.
I see. Interesting.
There is a very good reason why people don't trust this, but there is actual cannibalism.
Of course, I mean so that helps justify a level of why Christianity enslaved people, so they could enslave people. It was just a reason for them. I totally get that, but then it still doesn't say that every single slave was a cannibal. I mean, obviously that's complete bullshit. That's part of the point. And maybe some of them were, but because then you've also got to question things like, well, what about the Irish and the Chinese slaves that were building the railroads in North America at the time? Obviously, they weren't enslaved because they were quote unquote cannibals. They were just enslaved because of shitty people. But that's interesting.
Yes, I mean the Spanish and the Portuguese, they were the first ones who rode on that wave. And they needed this excuse to pretend that they were still following Christianity closely. But you see this with French people and English people, for example, that they didn't really give a shit about it. So at some point, they just accepted that slavery is okay, and they kept doing it. They didn't need the excuse anymore.
Yeah. Fascinating, really fast.
And
I still don't see that fully debunks cannibalism, though.
No, it doesn't.
It's an interesting thought, though.
Yes, and it shows how dangerous it is to bend the rules. The Spanish and the Portuguese bent the rules because they needed slaves for their new properties in the New World. And then you have just a bunch of idiots who copy this and don't understand why they're doing it. So when you look at French and English plantation owners, for example, in the New World, they were copying the behavior that they had seen, and they didn't even think about it. They saw the Spanish and Portuguese have slaves. So they thought, oh, okay, they're also Christian nations. They're very, very Catholic. Yeah, right.
Free labor, why not?
Yeah. And of course, with the Irish, you have Catholic people who are enslaved in that case. So the British may have thought it's okay for Catholics to do this, so we'll take Catholic slaves. That is one argument. The French themselves were Catholics, so they said, yeah, no problem. Yes, that is the background story. So you shouldn't believe that there is no cannibalism, but you also shouldn't believe that everyone who was called a cannibal in the past was actually a cannibal. And that's where we are educational, because we're not telling you that things are black or white. We're telling you that things are a little bit gray here.
Absolutely. 100%.
Right. And I'll close this off with the cannibal cooking manual. Do you want to see a cannibal fork, by the way?
Yeah, fuck it. Why not?
This is a cannibal's fork from Fiji.
Well,
this is real, so that was used to eat human flesh. Looks a bit different from our forks.
Yeah, not crazy different, but yeah, different enough.
Yeah. And there we have, first of all, a cooking manual by someone else. So this is not a cooking manual by the man next to the picture. This is by someone named Nico Claw, and Claw is written Claux. It's called the Cannibal Cookbook, and the subtitle says Human Meat Recipes from Around the World. But the guy next to it is Paul Shankman, an American anthropologist, and he was, as far as I know, the first person who collected recipes for human flesh.
All in the name of knowledge, you know?
You absolutely don't want to know some of these recipes, because in some cases they don't even eat the flesh. They have it eaten by maggots, and then that is second-hand cannibalism.
Well, there's like a cheese that gets eaten by maggots, and that's like a delicacy.
This is kasumarsu.
That's the one, yeah. So, not the weirdest thing, because that's a pretty fucking weird one, too.
Yeah, and there is another cheese that has little mildews on it, and they eat the cheese, and they're also eaten with the cheese. So it's the same colony of mildew. And allegedly, I haven't tried this, when you eat this mildew cheese, then you can feel them dancing on your tongue before you swallow them. You have this prickly feeling on your tongue. And I guess it's the same with maggots. I wouldn't try that.
No. I wouldn't. But it's a thing. It's a thing. It's out there.
It's a thing. So I think it's interesting to look into these cannibal cookbooks, and you can see that, for example, Albert Fish is on the title of the cannibal cookbook here. There are a couple of people who were real-life cannibals, and you will probably have to blur the thing below their faces.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I could do a bit of blurring. It's fine.
Yeah, so I find it interesting to look into this and to read these recipes, and it's definitely spooky. It's horrifying. So very fitting for Halloween. I wouldn't try any of this. And I don't think you should take it too seriously. I don't think you should to start brooding over it and thinking too much over it, because in some cases people want to try something just to try it. So there are people who develop an interest in eating actual human flesh just because they thought about it too much. I don't think that should happen. And if you want to know what the mellified man tasted like, for example, you could do the whole procedure with ordinary meat. You could just candy ordinary meat in honey. So if you ever feel like trying that, that would be something.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe.
Okay. Maybe. We're done. We made it. We survived.
We survived cannibalism.
Yes, and we still have all of our parts.
I think that's all that matters. Somehow surviving cannibalism, and neither of us got eaten. Amazing. Wow, certainly quite a lot. It's really really good though. I think it's very informative, and like we were talking about, the fact that cannibalism doesn't just come in a simple black and white form. There are different versions of it depending on the circumstances, situations, the ritualistic aspects, etc., etc. It's truly fascinating, and then even the tie-in of how some people were enslaved and called cannibals just so they could be enslaved, even if they weren't actually cannibals. It's very interesting. There is a lot that's gone into the history of this. It's I think this has been quite an interesting Halloween topic. I really, really do.
Yes, absolutely. So I personally think that maybe you should pull this forward and bring this out next week.
Oh yeah, the plan is this is going to go out on Halloween. That's the plan. I'll focus on this one, and get this one out, and then I can get back to the other ones. So that's my current plan.
So that would be great as a Halloween topic, I think. And you could even have some shorts about it. So about why people think cannibalism isn't real, or about certain things like our little game. So people can really see that it is not limited to one group of people, because you will get accused of the old racism again. People like to use that word, although it's a nothing burger of a word. We can go into this another time. Because they think cannibalism is something that Europeans invented to denigrate people from lesser developed societies, like in Africa or in the Pacific and so on. But it isn't that. So the most well-documented cases of cannibalism actually come from the Western world. And that doesn't mean that the Western world had more cannibals than lesser developed areas of the world. It just means that documentation was a lot better here than in other places. So the cannibals from the Congo, for example, those are people who didn't write this down, who didn't have a system to write it down and to preserve it at all. It only became a thing when missionaries and explorers came to their area and started to write it down. So in some cases, you can't really say there is a hub, there is a cluster of something, because there are many cases. Sometimes there are many cases because there is good documentation, like the English outhouse thing. English people did not poop more than other Europeans, they just wrote more about it.
Well, exactly. I think that's the big crux of everything, is the fact that if there's documentation of it, that helps you get a level of context about certain information, but not everything has been documented, and then certain documents have also been lost to time, or maybe they've been destroyed or whatever. So we don't know everything about everything because there's no documentation of everything. So we just go based on our general understanding, our findings, and then also any documentation we do find to help us kind of piece together bits of the puzzle. It's just, we do the best we can. That's all we can do.
Right. So everyone has cannibalism or had it at some point, and we have some very diverse cases. We have different reasons for cannibalism, as Nate already said. And it's really a good topic to get informed about, because it's not just this terrifying stuff. In some cases, you really learn something about people that live at the other end of the world. If you want to have more of it, there is a Wikipedia article called Human Cannibalism. So they have ordinary cannibalism that is just titled cannibalism, but they also have human cannibalism, where they specifically go into the different types of human cannibalism. And they mention exo and endo, for example. They mention emergency and psychopathy. So if you want to read more about that and find even more human groups who did commit cannibalism, then go into that and you will find even more tribes than I mentioned, because this video is already pretty long.
Yeah,
and I
that's
think we're closing it yet.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's great. I'll definitely pop a link in our description for that, and probably put up a little picture reference. That's fantastic. Well, we really hope you've enjoyed the Too Weird to Be True Halloween special of cannibalism, and the many different forms that it comes in, including all over the world. Very incredible. It's always amazing, the stuff that Ligeia knows and the stuff that she shares with us, because it really does help paint more of a picture about life. And I think that's perhaps one of the best things. And we really hope that you've enjoyed the time with us, and we'll see you for the next episode of Too Weird to Be True. Thank you again, Ligeia, so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Don't forget the blood chocolate challenge.
Good reminder. Don't forget. We need 5 people at least.
Yeah, we want to see Nate eat blood chocolate. Russian blood chocolate.
I'll do it. 5 people, I'll do it. Awesome.
If that doesn't work, you will have to get black pudding from somewhere.
Well, yeah, but I eat that on an English breakfast anyway, so it's not really. I'll do that. That's fucking fine. I'll cook it here. I don't give a fuck. I'll scare the shit out of some people. I don't care. I'll eat it. It's nice. It's quite nice in my opinion.
Great. So, thank you for coming, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this, although it is a difficult topic. I mean, most people probably wouldn't laugh as much as us, but we are always having tremendous fun when we're making these videos.
You gotta have a bit of fun, you know? You gotta take everything
Halloween.
a little lighthearted. Exactly. Happy Halloween, everybody. Bye!
Bye!
Thank you so much to my YouTube members and Patreon members for all the love and support. It's thanks to people like you that we can keep growing.